Good evening, everybody. It is 7:30, Thursday, September 28th, and this is a meeting of the Finance Committee. We're not at a regularly scheduled time. We're at a unique time for us. So at the start of the meeting, I'm going to just introduce the counselors that are here. I will introduce members of the administration or city staff as we go through our items. So in addition to, I apologize if you're hearing that on your end. That was, I'm turning on my do not disturb right now. So apologies if that came through to all of you. In addition to myself and the committee, I'm joined by Councillor Humphrey from Ward 5, Councillor Kalis, Vice Chair of the Committee from Ward 8, Councillor Oliver from Ward 1, Councillor Maliki from Ward 3. And then in addition to those who are members of the committee, we are all, I see Councillor Norton from Ward 2 who just joined as well, also a member of the committee. And we're also joined by President Albright and Councillor Lucas. Did I miss any councillors? Okay. We are going to quickly go through the first three items on our agenda, and then we will get to the Operations Booster Stabilization Fund. So if those who are here for that item want to hold tight for, I can't imagine it'll be much more than 10 to 15 minutes. Feel free to turn cameras off and just follow along as we're going through the first few items, and we will be back to you very shortly. Okay, first we've got item 273-23, authorization to accept and expend the sum of $5,000 and to accept 2 pieces of artwork for the Department of Senior Services. And I see that we are joined by Mignon Murray, who is our Director of Senior Services. I hope I got your title right. Please let me know if not. Thank you very much for joining us. We'd love to hear from you on this item.
Sure. We've had a very generous donation that we're seeking acceptance of from Wayne Johnson and his wife, Melissa, who are both Weston residents, but have 2 members of their family who are Newton residents and have been very active in the community. And in honor of them, they want to make a donation of $5,000 and 2 pieces of art.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And let me see if we have any comments or questions from members of the committee. Councillor Humphrey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering, Ms. Murray, if you could tell us anything about the art at all that wasn't in the packet.
Sure. The art are 2 original pieces by 2 Italian artists, Mark DeSalio and Ben Fensky. They have been appraised, and we need to keep them as art in the wherever we have senior services for the next 3 years, and then we are allowed to sell them if we should so wish. They're worth about $23,000 and $10,000 respectively.
Interesting. And these are paintings or sculptures or what are they?
Yes, they're landscape paintings.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm happy to move approval.
Thank you. We have a motion from Councillor Humphrey to approve. Do we have other comments or questions on this item? Seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? I do not know what the count of members of the committee is. Maybe our clerk can tell me, but that's unanimous approval, and I trust that you'll count them up for us, Mr. Cudmore. Thank you.
Yes, that is 6-0, 6-0.
6-0. Okay, very good. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, appreciate you bringing this donation to us and to our attention, and happy to have you, and are grateful for the generosity of this donation. So thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, councilors.
We're going to go on to item 274-23, authorization to appropriate and expend $10,831.12 from handicap parking fines and disability commission receipts reserved for appropriations account to supplement funds being used at Williams Elementary School. I see we've also been joined by Councillor Gentile, member of the committee from Ward 4. And I'm just, pardon me while I look around the screen. Ms. Lemieux, Who are you expecting to hear from tonight on this particular item?
Jeannie Fairley, our ADA coordinator, is on and will be presenting this.
Okay, I thank Ms. Fairley, welcome. Not seeing you on my screen, so I hope you're here.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. There you are. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you so much. We'd love to hear from you on this.
Oh, thank you. Yes, as staff to the Commission on Disability, and I believe maybe if she got in, one of the co-chairs, Ema John's daughter, is also here, and the PTO of the Williams School actually approached me first, because they needed some more accessibility at their playground, and it all developed over the last few months and a plan is still being put together, but there was interest and support by the Commission on Disability to approve of a funding of about $10,831.12 for different equipment, and it may change a little bit depending on what the final plan works out to be. And but we had been working with the school as well as Parks Recreation and Culture. So the 4 items, I believe, or equivalent, that's what the motion said from the Commission on Disability, was adaptive accessible swings, but there's no swing structure, so we're going to wait for the swing structure. Two accessible picnic tables. There are regular picnic tables there, and right now there's some substitute ones, wooden ones from Parks and Recreation and Culture collection. So they would be replaced one of these new ones and more or less match up with the ones that they already have there. And the last thing was adjustable basketball pole, where the backboard and hoop could be lowered for children using wheelchairs or walkers, or even just small children trying to throw a ball in the basket. So but mostly it's all got to do with accessibility. There's a special program that we were also made aware of this spring that entered into Williams School with several children, more than you would probably find in an average elementary school. I think it's 6 children who have significant disabilities, and mobility disabilities is mostly what they have, as well as other disabilities. So we just they wanted to improve the accessibility and the amenities of their play structure and playground. And it's the fines money from the Commission on Disability, which you already mentioned in the agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fairley. Councillor Humphrey, I see your hand first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Fairley, you mentioned that Williams in particular had a significant need here because of a particular size population that would benefit from this. I was wondering, though, you mentioned at the beginning about a PTO request coming through. So how was that what originally got this on your radar, or how was it, decided how to prioritize this versus, any other particular school? Obviously, this is a very worthy project. I'm just always curious about how we're ranking priorities.
So the COD itself doesn't have a ranking priority at the moment. They address every request they get, and they don't get tons of requests, but the reason actually came to my attention from the physical therapist of the school, wanting in particular the swings and anything else that could help the playground to be more accessible, and for the children of this program to be included during lunch out or recess, that sort of thing. Right now they are not as able, and there's been some changes, wonderful changes, even since we approved this, as far as trying to find some portable equipment, small stuff that would come in and out for the children to put on the hard top, just for some more accessibility and fun until all of this can be purchased and installed.
Thank you. I certainly think it's great. And it's a good reminder to our constituents to get organized and get involved on these things, because often the advocacy coming from the grassroots level is how this stuff often gets on the radar and gets prioritized. And of course, I'm happy to defer to the Ward 4 member of the committee for any motions on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Counselor Humphrey. Do we have other comments or questions on this? Counselor Gentel, would you like to make the motion? Oh, we just need you to unmute.
Oh my
Thanks.
God.
My first time, I forgot how to work this. So anyway, I would like to move approval. I don't want to put her on the spot, but I thought I saw the superintendent had her hand up at one point. I didn't know if she was looking to weigh in on this, but I don't see it now. So I will move approval of the item.
Okay, thank you. Superintendent Nolan, did you have your hand up on this item? I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
It's totally fine. Everything was explained. You just need to know that the Williams population has grown in terms of students who would need this accessibility. And I prioritized this because we want those students to have the same kind of experience that other children would have at their elementary school.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll take a vote on Counselor Gentile's motion. Okay, I don't see any other hands. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? I believe we're 7-0 at this point. Is that right, Mr. Cudmore?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, great. And I see we've also been joined by a few more counselors. So let me take a moment
Thank
to
you.
introduce them. I see Counselor Greenberg, Counselor Laredo. And I believe I've introduced everybody else. Ms. Fairley, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for that overview. And of course, for the fantastic work that you do on behalf of our community. Nice to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
We're going to go on to 275-23, requesting authorization to accept and expend the sum of $427,454.54 from an assistance to firefighter grant. I know I saw Deputy Chief Bianchi.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Did I mispronounce
Um,
his name, by the way? Is it Bianchi or Bianchi?
It's Bianchi, but I'll take anything. It's fine.
I try to get it right, but sometimes I forget. So thank
No
you
problem.
and welcome. We're very happy to have you here.
Yeah, this AFG grant is for a few things. One being a safety officer training program. We currently have a handful of firefighters that are trained in being a safety officer, trained and certified. This will help set up a course and a class to have about 20 more trained in the safety officer program. Another thing is the health and wellness program. We don't have the exact ideas of what we're going to do, but it's going to be geared towards exercise, healthy cooking, healthy eating, body scans, stress management, things like that. Another thing it's going to be used for is our RIT team and our rapid intervention team for training and replacement of equipment that is starting to get outdated. And yeah, the good things about the grants is that it gets to extend our budget, and we will be matching the 10%, which is I think about $42,000, and that will be coming out of our training and our equipment accounts, and that's it.
Well, thank you. And as always, you do an excellent job, you and your colleagues, in bringing grant money in, and we really appreciate that. I always love to see it. Could you just spend a minute telling us what sorts of officer training you expect to do?
Yeah, not only operational, where safety officers are on the scene of an incident, looking out for any type of safety hazards. That could be anything from like a pool in a backyard and fighting a fire on a dark night. Like you want to watch out and not, fall into the pool. To maybe possible collapses of something. So they're really geared on focus of looking at the big picture of safety of the firefighters that are trying to work in this hazard.
Okay, I think, I know we've had ongoing conversations in the Public Safety and Transportation Committee about training in the department. I think that remains a topic of interest, particularly around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and would be curious as time goes on to continue those conversations and see what you feel the progress has been, particularly remembering around budget time, talking about how we keep track our progress and measure what we're achieving with our training efforts and dollars. So just something I wanted to continue to mention as we talk about officer training in different contexts throughout the year.
And we are currently right now, this is kind of more geared towards a safety officer, like safety on the scene, but we are currently, I think we have already in the stages of planning of an actual officer training program that actually includes all those things also. So we are actually in the process of forming that now.
Excellent, thank you. Do we have other comments or questions from the committee? I don't see any hands. Do we have a motion on this item?
I'm happy to move it.
Motion to approve by Counselor Oliver. Any other discussion before we vote? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We're 7-0 on that item. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Okay, on to our last event on our agenda. Certainly not the least. It is item 306-23 to establish and appropriate funds to an operations booster stabilization fund. I'm just going to take a moment to read this one out. So this is Her Honor the Mayor requesting authorization to establish an operations booster stabilization fund to pay for a portion of the annual general fund appropriations for the city's pension system, appropriate the sum of $20,500,000 of overlay surplus as declared by the city's Board of Assessors to the Operations Booster Stabilization Fund, and transfer the sum of $5,513,000 from the account specified here, which is appellate tax board interest and penalties, to the Operations Booster Stabilization Fund. As most of us who are on the screen tonight will remember, we met on this item on September 11th. We had a pretty lengthy discussion on it, and ultimately the Finance Committee denied a motion to approve. So in other words, rejected this item 3-4-1. And then at the full council meeting on the 18th, the council voted to send this back to us for further work, further deliberation. So tonight we're joined by a number of folks, including our superintendent, Dr. Anna Nolan, our assistant superintendent, Liam Hurley. Of course, we're joined by Ms. Lemieux, our CFO, by Perry Rosenfield, who, Perry, I'm sorry, I forget your exact title, but is certainly a superstar member of our finance team. I see Andrew Lee from our city solicitor's office, and I'm just looking around. Who did I miss from the city or school department who's here to participate in this conversation tonight? Did I get everybody? Okay. So we started our presentation or our meeting last time with a presentation by Ms. Lemieux. I don't expect that we're going to repeat that tonight, but I do know that Superintendent Nolan, you did want to address the group before we started. Is that right?
Yes, please, Madam Chair.
Well, we'd love to hear from you. So why don't you kick us off, Ms. Lemieux? Of course, if you want to say anything at the outset, we're very happy to have you share whatever you'd like, and then we'll let the council guide questions and comments and where we'd like to take the conversation. So Superintendent Nolan, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I appreciate you allowing me to speak at your meeting this evening. I am here because last evening at our school committee meeting, our school committee board voted to take up a resolution, which I believe Ms. Chair Grossman has to share with everyone if she has not done so already. Just in support of my being here, but also in terms of trying to acquire any funds possible to enhance the operations of the Newton Public Schools. So my primary job is to make sure that the Newton Public Schools has the resources it needs to operate effectively. And no other funding sources have been offered at this time to assist in operation stabilization over time. And so I am here to say that we would gratefully accept and would like to access the funds that have been offered for the Newton Public Schools. There was some discussion among our board, and the resolution that they framed is with Chair Grossman tonight.
Thank you. I am under the impression that everybody did receive that resolution, but I just want to confirm. Did everyone on the council receive the school committee resolution that Dr. Nolan's referring to? Is that a no?
When was
No.
that sent?
What's that?
When was it sent?
I cannot tell you that exactly until I pull that up. Hold on.
Do we know who it came from?
I thought it went to the entire council. Came from the chair of the school committee. Apologies. I didn't realize that it was, if it was addressed just to me, that it was addressed just to me, but hold on. Let me take care of that right now.
I don't see
I
it.
didn't see it.
So it went to Miss Moore. Hi, Carol, please share the following memo with the full city council. It details the school committee's approval of a budget resolution during last night's meeting. Copied to me, to Council President Albright and Vice President Lipoff. That did not go out, I gather. Okay, in that case, Mr. Cudmore, I'm going to forward this to you and ask you to share it on the screen so everybody can see it at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I also want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So this was sent today at 10:26 a.m. Let me know when you receive that. And I will, once we just confirm that it's exactly the right thing that you're referring to, Dr. Nolan, then I'll just hit forward on this to everybody as well. So you all have it in your email inboxes.
I did receive it. I can share my screen if you'd like.
That would be great. Okay, maybe zoom in on that a bit. I don't know if everybody can see it. Actually, I'm gonna try to zoom in on it myself. Dr. Nolan, can I just confirm this is what you're referring to?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so why don't we just read it out loud? Apologies that I'm like bending forward to my camera to read this to all of you. Dear esteemed City Council, as the chair of the Newton School Committee, I'm proud to report the unanimous affirmative result. The school committee's vote demonstrating our resolve to advocate for additional funding for the Newton Public Schools. As you're well aware, we've had to reduce staff and programs over the last few years due to increasing costs. There can be no doubt that we need additional funding. Last night, the committee voted 9-0 on the resolution listed below. Sincerely, Tamika Olszewski, the chair of the Newton School Committee. Resolution in support of securing additional funding for the Newton Public Schools. The school committee believes that the Newton Public Schools needs additional funding to provide the services that our students need and deserve, and that our community expects. We support all efforts of the City Council and Mayor to provide additional funds to the Newton Public Schools. And then you can see the roll call vote below where each member of the school committee voted yes. Okay, do we need to leave that up? Do folks want a minute to read that, or is that sufficient? I'm not hearing that anybody needs it up. So I think we can
Sorry, I
probably,
think it's sufficient. Sorry.
okay. I think we can stop screen share and I am going to just hit forward on this and I'm sending it to the entire city council email list. So you should all have this in your inbox in a second. Okay. All set for now, Dr. Nolan. Anything else you wanted to share before we go to the next speaker?
All set. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you. And it's meaningful to have your participation on this really important discussion. So we really appreciate it. Ms. Lemieux, I told you you'd have the next opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be very brief. I just have really 2 points that I would like to make. The first is just to reiterate the purpose of what the stabilization fund is for. Our intent is to try to relieve pressure on the general fund in order to create an ongoing funding source for the Newton Public Schools over the next 8 years, while we are fully funding our pension system based on the funding schedule as voted on by the Newton Retirement System, so that everybody can just, again, wrap their heads around what the purpose of all of this. The one additional thing that I wanted to say, I'm hoping that you all received a memo from me today. So I don't know if anybody can nod their head as to whether or not they received anything good. Okay, so the NTA I think it was Friday, the mayor and I received a request from Mike Zillis, president of the NTA, as they were preparing for their negotiations. They had several questions for us on free cash, this particular docket item that's in front of you. And once we really finished putting all of our answers together today and we were going to send them to the NTA, we realized that these answers and these questions are very much on the forefront of your minds also. And so what we did was expand the CC list, and we sent our responses to all of you, as well as all of the members of the school committee, just so that everybody will be dealing with the same information. So I just wanted to make sure that you had received that. It's a fairly long document. I don't know if people had a chance to look at it, but we wanted to make sure that you had the information.
Thank you. And Mr. Cudmore, just a note to you to make sure that all of these pieces of information that we're referring to in the meeting tonight get attached to our report for the meeting that goes before the council.
Got it.
Thank you. Councillor Humphrey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate that we're getting the chance to work on this again in committee. As I did the motion to send it back, I just, think it's important that we try to be able to get a super majority of the council on the same page about, what we want to do with this money. I was glad to see the resolution up on the screen. I think I was a little bit surprised that it was not super specific in terms of what kind of additional resources they were talking about or how they were thinking of using it. And when we had, previously mentioned the possibility of additional resources to NPS in the past couple budget cycles, we didn't hear that from the school committee. I'm not saying that wasn't their view, but we didn't hear it at the time. And in fact, I had heard that at least some of the school committee members felt they didn't need an additional money for the allocation, which had sort of surprised me when I heard that. And it's not my view anyway. Ms. Lemieux, I was wondering if you could comment. You and I spoke about this on the phone, but I was wondering if you could comment for the benefit of everyone on the finance committee and everyone else about how this plan has evolved from the initial announcement to the draft language that we got ahead of the last city council meeting, specifically in relation to, I think, taking out the step of routing this through the pensions process and making it a more direct allocation toward schools and other departments. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and the thinking there?
Thank you, Councillor Humphrey. I would say at the outset, the plan has not changed. I want to really be clear about that. In calculating the strategy of this plan and how we came up with the dollars for NPS, the pension system plays a huge role in that. It did in the beginning, it still does. We looked at this $26 million that we have from the overlay surplus and the money that we do not need from our interest account for ATB cases. So the $26 million, we took that money and we calculated based on what the Federal Reserve is forecasting for interest rates for the next few years. So we wanted to be very conservative. We forecasted what we thought we could earn in interest. Obviously, as I've said all along, hopefully we will earn more money in interest, but we wanted to be conservative with our calculations. We then took those numbers and looked at what the funding schedule needs to increase by for the pension system, because that's really the lever, if you will, that is complicating our budgets for the next 8 years. With this fund, we determined that we could take 1.6% of the annual growth in the appropriation for the pension funding. And we would have that much money that we could take as a revenue each year. That's how the pension fund fit in back then. It still is the same today. The reality of what will happen, and this is in your forecast, I don't know if you all have your forecast in front of you, but just so that everybody understands the mechanics, what will happen is we will take this money as an interfund transfer from the stabilization fund. It will become a revenue to the general fund in reality. And so on page 52 in your 5-year plan, you can see at the very bottom of all the revenues that we would be anticipating, we show what the transfer would be from the Operations Booster Stabilization Fund. That money, which starts out next year at just about $660,000, increases to $7.8 million by fiscal 32. That money goes to the general fund. On the next page in the financial forecast, on page 53, you can see that we then take the Newton Public Schools, our forecasted appropriation for the Newton Public Schools for the next 10 years, really is what our plan is, but that increases by 3.5%. We then added on to that 70% of what that 1.6% would yield as a revenue. And so it shows the schools next year receiving an additional almost $462,000, growing to almost $5.5 million by fiscal 32. The other 30%, so I don't want people to, so pensions are a part of the thinking. And that's why I said the whole purpose of this is to create funds to relieve the pressure of the 6.6% growth while we are trying to help set up an ongoing increase for funding for the schools. So the plan has not changed. What we tried to do with the board order, when it became very clear when we all met in committee a few weeks ago, that the board order was probably not tight enough to really make sure, because we didn't say anything about the Newton Public Schools in the board order, even though it has been our plan from the very beginning. So what we tried to do was tighten it all up in the board order.
Well, yes, I understand that the intent is the same as what you announced, but structurally, the way that you are implementing it has in fact changed, because originally the plan was to put the money from the stabilization fund toward the pension fund and then take a matching amount that would have gone to the pension fund and instead apply that to the schools. And you have removed a step there, which I think is good. If that's the direction we're going to go, I think it would be better to do it this way. I'm just commenting that structurally that part of it has changed, and that I understand there's you know, the pension situation has influenced your thinking here and you want to relieve the pressure on the other departments and the schools coming from the pensions contributions. But in terms of the technical aspects of the plan, there has been a change there. I had a question for Mr. Lee about the language in the order, if you're able to comment on that. And I think we just heard some allusions to this here. The way it's structured now, which I've heard some concerns from other counselors about this as well, is that it is structured in terms of percentage matches rather than structured in terms of specific dollar amounts. And I understand there's some complexity in terms of specifying specific dollar amounts because you don't know exactly how the market's going to do. But what has effectively, as I interpret it, been written into this particular draft is that if the pension contributions amount were to be changed for a given year, right, renegotiated with the board, et cetera, there would be a matching change in the money that was going to NPS and to the schools because of how it's written and how it's tied together. So if for some reason we had to reduce or chose to reduce the pension contributions that year, or even in the other direction, for whatever reason, decided maybe the market's underperformed on the pension fund and we needed to increase it in a particular year, it seems like these are tethered together. And I was wondering if you could comment on that. Personally, I would be very, very uncomfortable with voting for a plan that has it tethered in this way. And yes, I understand you could make changes with a 2/3 vote in the future, but to my mind, it seems like this is very restrictive in tying these things together, which are not necessarily related.
I can't comment if they're related or not, Councilor Humphrey. What I can say is that your interpretation of the language is correct. It's based on a percentage, right? So then whatever the percentage is or whatever that 1.6 increase is going to be in terms of number amounts, that's the amount that's going to correlate from the stabilization fund.
So I am correct then that if we were to reduce for any reason the pension fund contribution in a given fiscal year, unless we did a 2/3 change to this stabilization fund, there would be an automatic reduction in funding to NPS and to the other departments.
That's correct. And if there's an increase in the amount that goes to the pension fund, there'd be a correlating increase in the stabilization fund. Like I said, it's just tied to the percentage of whatever the pension fund contribution is going to be.
So I don't know, you know, where the rest of the council is going to go on the overall plan here, but my recommendation is to maybe come up with an alternative language that achieves the same objectives without tethering it together in this way, because I don't know that that was intended or not. I can't comment on that. Ms. Lemieux had expressed that it was not an intentional effect there, but I certainly know that I don't think I would be able to vote for a plan that had that mechanism included in it. I don't know if Ms. Lemieux had another comment on that point or if I should move on to my other questions.
Why don't you pause there? Because I think that's an important point. Let Ms. Lemieux respond and then I'll hand it right back to you. Go ahead, Ms. Lemieux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think they need to be tethered together. And so this is not a mistake. I don't want anyone to think this is an error. This was written this way. We worked closely with the law department. If a few years from now, the retirement board chose for some reason to change the funding schedule for our pensions, I would expect that the then sitting city council and the mayor would want to take another look at this. I think what I'm certainly hoping is that we will end up earning more interest than we have in our plan, and that the mayor, whoever it is within the next 8-year period, would be coming back to the council saying, we actually have more interest than we expected, and we are able to raise the 1.6 to perhaps 1.7 or 1.8. Right now, this all calculates so that the city needs to set aside an extra 5% each year for the growth in the pensions. My hope would be that we get to a point where maybe it's 4.9 or 4.8%, that the interest that we're earning yields more than 1.6%. So I don't want anyone to think that that this is an error. I think we need to keep it, I toyed with ideas of having it say up to 1.6%. or at least 1.6% to give a little bit more latitude, but I didn't think that was really appropriate. And if this was something that were going to be in place for 50 years, and everybody who was involved in the conversation would be long gone, then I would really think that we needed to adjust how this is. But this is an 8-year plan. I dare say that several of us, I'm saying the collective us, may be around 8 years from now or along the way and may want to change this. So I personally think it's appropriate the way that it's written. But clearly that's why we have you deliberating in committee. That's why it's back here. But I personally am comfortable with the way it's written.
Okay, I appreciate the explanation. I still don't agree with that. And I think that at our last finance meeting, Councillor Malachy made an excellent point that it is not always the easiest thing in the world to get 2/3 of the councillors to agree on anything. And it's going to be hard to get us to agree to a plan this year. It could be potentially very difficult to get us to agree to something, 5 years out from now. We have no idea what's going on or who's going to be there. And as a matter of general principle, I've always felt very strongly that you should write things exactly how you want them to be, for regardless of who is in particular offices at the time in the future. Because, if you write it, in the way you intend it, then it can't be hopefully used in some other way. If that's what you intended, fine. But personally, I'm not going to go along with that, I don't think. I wanted to ask some more general questions about the base allocation that we are at right now, because we've been hearing a lot, obviously, about 3.5% or potentially 3.7% with a plan like this. I know that some folks have contended that there have been a few points in recent fiscal years where the allocation did not end up going up by that amount of money. And as a result of that, the sort of base number that's increasing every year by 3.5% from the present is lower than it might otherwise have been. The three specific examples are that there was some question as to whether or not full day kindergarten had been funded at a level that had been agreed to originally, that had that number been $500,000 higher, that would have been $500,000 plus 3.5% every year built in. Second was, of course, in the year 2020 during the pandemic, FY21, we had to make some emergency cuts. That money did not get put back later. And third was the most recent budget season earlier this year for FY24, where the OPEB money got pulled from the NPS side back to the city side, which I think was the correct decision, and certainly the correct decision long term, but that those dollars were not replaced in this fiscal year on the NPS side with other stuff. So I was wondering if you could address those points and the impact that has in terms of the base number we're working off of going forward when we're talking about 3.5% or 3.7% per year.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Please.
I'm happy to respond to those. Thank you, Councillor Humphrey. For full day kindergarten, we worked very closely with the then superintendent's office. We were told that full day kindergarten would cost $1 million a year. We added $1 million to the school department budget. That $1 million is part of the base. I think that was fiscal 19. It was either fiscal 19 or September of 19. So it could have been fiscal 20. I forget which year it was. But we added the $1 million. That $1 million was then baked into the base, and that goes up by whatever percent we have given the schools for an increase in their appropriation since that point in time. As far as the pandemic money, we went to the schools when the pandemic started, and I think we asked them to put together a budget that was, I want to say, $1.5 million less. I don't think we did it on a percentage basis. I think we asked them for an amount of money. We were, when the pandemic started, as you can imagine, the schools had already presented their budget, I think, and the city side was just about ready. We were very close to hitting print. It was mid-March. And so I think we asked the schools to take a $1.5 million reduction in their budget. We needed to come up with $9.6 million by the time we hit print on the budget, between what we expected to lose in rooms and meals taxes, parking meter receipts, interest income completely plummeted over the weekend. And so I think it was an amount of money. What I can tell you is when we put our next year's budget together, so it would have been the fiscal 22 budget, we absolutely went back and added that number in our calculation to the base of what NPS would have had in fiscal 21, and then escalated that amount by whatever it was that we increased the fiscal 22 budget for. So we definitely went back and added back the money. No, they didn't get that $1.5 million. They didn't receive that for fiscal 21, but we put it into the base for going forward. And then the last point that you made, the OPEB decision was made at the very end of the budget process. We simply took that amount of money out, you are correct, out of their budget. It was never the intent to replace that with other money for the schools. The value to the schools in us having done that is that next year, if that OPEB amount still needed to increase by 5, 6, 7%, whatever that amount would be, if we have more people coming on, new employees, replacing particularly retirees that are filling positions where we have not been setting aside OPEB money before, the schools could be experiencing a 5, 6, 7, 8% increase in that $3+ million number. We have taken that over to the city side. We will absorb whatever that increase is, and so the schools actually will not have to worry about that higher increase in that particular line item going forward. It was never the intent to just give the schools a different $3 million. We didn't have $3 million to do that. The intent of the OPEB change was so that we would bear the risk of it increasing by more than the amount of money that every other account was going up by.
All right, and my final question is just, I had raised this at the last Finance Committee meeting on this, and I think other counselors had as well. We've since had a presentation on the new CIP, the capital improvements plan projects. And I know that Commissioner Morse has been, as you mentioned, working hard on lists of schools and non-schools related projects that are quite urgent, but especially a lot of schools projects. Some of them are longer term things, but some of them, are potentially very near term. At the time, at the finance meeting, you said you hadn't really explored the possibility of potentially using some of this money towards those. I'm not saying, use the whole amount necessarily, but have you since then looked at possibly any of these? Are there any projects that jump out at you as potential ones that, could really benefit not only the student population, but also all of our workers in those buildings?
Thank you again for that question. So I would say we have not looked at it in terms of taking this money, this 26 million. We are still convinced that this is a good plan for the city, and we would like to see this plan move forward. What we clearly are looking at is our free cash, which I believe you probably all know at this point that free cash was certified this week on Monday. And it was certified for almost $5.4 million more than we initially thought, which was actually very good news for all of us. And so we've had conversations about the fact that we have an extra $5 million in free cash. We certainly want to take the opportunity to sit down with the superintendent, to sit down with her administrative teams, Dave Stickney, her facilities people, and understand what their top priorities are. And so we'll certainly be working through those conversations in the next several weeks, and we'll be coming to you with a somewhat comprehensive package of projects that we would like to do. But I would say that those projects, the intent will be that we will be coming to you with recommendations of using free cash.
Thank you for now.
Okay, thank you. I want to go back to Dr. Nolan for a minute, and then Counselor Gentile, you are up next. Dr. Nolan, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to place on the record at the request of the committee that we had a conversation about receiving funding, additional funding for the Newton Public Schools, and no one is rejecting this money and understands that we should be advocating for any dollar that we can put towards the Newton student population, and that is what we are doing.
Thank you. Counselor Gentile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, we can.
All right, so I wanted to start by saying that over the past 15 years, there have been a lot of good people, talented people that have been hired to come to work for the city. But in my opinion, and with due respect to all those people, the most important hire that we've had is our CFO, Maureen Lemieux. She has done more for the city in terms of financial stability and other things than I have ever had seen in my 42 years one individual have. All right. Now I'm saying that because by the time this night's over, it's going to look as though I have absolutely no faith in my friend, and that we're at great odds, but sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. The more I have thought about this, this is not a good plan. It is possibly the worst financial plan, and I've seen many of them over the years that I have seen. And the biggest problem is, you know, we have this wonderful windfall of $26 million backed up by another $28 million in free cash. And we've got this plan that wants to just go ahead and take away pretty much all flexibility. It wants to tie the hands of this administration, and something that really bothers me, it attempts to tie the hands of future administrations by going 8 years out. And there's no need for it. And we should be, the one thing I agree with is we should be establishing a reserve fund. We can come up with all kinds of names that, you know, will be catchy, but we don't need to have another stabilization fund that requires a 2/3 vote to do anything. We have one of those. And I don't know for the life of me why this administration would want to do it to themselves. And it really, as I said, it ticks me off that we want to try and do this to future administrations. So I had a couple of specific questions. I've heard different things about the rules that dictate stabilization funds. I heard that the initial language or the board order, excuse me, must be followed for a period of like 2 or 3 years, and then it is no longer binding. Is there any truth to that, or are we obligated to follow you know, the rules of the board order as to how the fund is set, the stabilization fund is set up?
Attorney Lee, do you want to answer that?
I do. So that's not true, Councilor Gentile. The stabilization fund, the purpose has to be followed until the purpose is changed. That's the rule. You might be referencing if a stabilization fund is funded from a 2.5 override, which is has a whole different set of rules than what we're talking about here tonight.
Okay, so
wait, so let me just follow up on that one point, because at our last meeting, my recollection of this 3-year situation was that if we were to establish the stabilization fund, that the account had to remain in existence for 3 years. Is that accurate?
I'm not aware of any requirement that it has to stay for 3 years. It could be changed, but again, that would require 2/3 vote of the city council.
Mr. Curley, I know you were the one who found that tidbit of information. Do you have that handy?
Yes, in my discussions with Andrew Nelson, DOR supervisor, regarding the establishment of the stabilization fund, he said if it is established, it must remain for 3 years. You can change the purpose, but you can't dissolve the stabilization fund within 3 years. And the changing of the purpose, no matter if it's in 3 years or 7 years, would still require a 2/3 vote.
Do you have that? I remember you were referencing a specific chapter of the Mass General Law.
Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 5B is for stabilization funds and their establishment.
All right, why don't we put a pin in that one? Attorney Lee, I'm gonna let you look that over as the conversation goes on. I want to let Counselor Gentile continue down his train of thought. I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to clarify what we heard at the last.
No, that's fine. I think it's important that we understand the rules surrounding, the stabilization fund. So we'll get to the bottom of that. But I guess no matter what we come up with, it seems everybody's agreeing that the only way that you can change the way that it is used is with a 2/3 vote. And I think that that's a big mistake. The second question is, I read closely the language, and the way that it's written right now, all of the money is to be used on the operating side of the budget, and not one single penny can be used for capital. Is that correct? The way it's written now?
Ms. Lemieux or Attorney Lee, either one of you are welcome to answer that.
I think it's a yes or no.
I think that is not correct because the language says transferring into the city's general fund appropriation each year for the next 8 fiscal years, an amount equal to 30% of 1.6% of the city's annual general fund increase in pension appropriation. So it says nothing about whether or not it could be used, that 30% for pensions or debt service or anything else. So I think that's incorrect.
Attorney Lee, do you want to add or?
As the CFO said, once the monies are transferred into the general fund, they're treated like general fund monies. They're not earmarked for any particular purpose once they're in the general fund.
So a certain percentage, the 30% that's being referred to, could be used for some capital items?
Yes.
All right, because I guess what
Or if I can just interrupt you, or the debt service on capital items.
okay, because all right, well that is I'm glad that is the case, because one of the objections that I had and it's still not I still think it's too restrictive, but it's better than I thought, is typically one-time monies, whether they be overlay surplus or free cash, that's our single biggest source of capital improvement monies. And
right.
We just heard from Jonathan, I think that we've added another 111 projects to the capital improvement plan. So, I mean, there's a list longer than both of my arms. And I think that we should be able to use or have access to some of this money to do some of those capital improvement projects like we have in the past. So I'm glad to hear. I'm not sure how much it quantifies, but anyway, my last question was, at least for now, in the last several years, I think that at the start of the budget process, I think that the mayor's office has tried to allot you know, a bottom line figure to the school department, and I think that you start with a 3.5% increase. Isn't that typically what we've done the last few years?
I think we may have had some years when it's been as low as 3.25, but
Okay.
in that range.
But is the plan to start again by, you know, allocating 3.5 or 3.25, something in that range, and then use this fund on top of that? Is
Yes.
that just the general?
That is definitely the plan, and that's why I mentioned the pages in the forecast. On page 53, we actually were very, very clear about that and show the NPS budget increasing by 3.5% every year, plus then the amount of money that they would receive because of this decision, if we go
Okay.
forward with it.
All right.
So it ends up being which is why we've said approximately 3.7. It starts out, I think the first year it's 3.67 or 3.68, and within the 8-year period, I think there's a year or two where it becomes 3.71 or 3.72, but it's the specific number is what we would be adding to that 3.5% increase.
Okay. So, and I think this will be at least my last question or point for now. I think as we know, a lot of this is being driven by the need that folks feel to better fund the school department, and I understand that, but I want to take you back to the budget time, and towards the end of the budget time, there was a shortage of hundreds of thousands of dollars, we were told, in the school budget that were vitally important. And I don't remember if it had to do with some middle school staff or some aides for in kindergarten, though I think that got taken care of. But anyway, there was, you know, $600,000 or $700,000, maybe $800,000 that the schools felt that they really needed. And it's on tape. And I said, you know, we are so flush with money, you know, give it to them. If it's that important, we'll just give it to them. Stop fighting over it and give it to them. The other point I want to make is we need to be a little more honest in our budgeting at budget time. And what I mean by that is all mayors have the tendency to overstate expenses and understate what they expect for revenues. That goes back, I mean, I started with Teddy Mann, and he and everybody since has done that. It's a question of degrees. And if we were a little bit more realistic about our numbers in the spring, then we would have the money if in a particular year we needed some extra money for the schools, or if we needed some money for a particular city department, because, you know, the city side does perform an awful lot of important functions, and they need money sometimes. So you saw the memo that I had sent to you from the treasurer, so you didn't have to take it from me. But last year I was critical, and I raised the point that to use $2.5 million as the number for interest income revenue was woefully underestimating it. And that was one of the sources that we could have used. We could have increased that number easily and given that number to the schools and still had a balanced budget. And we should be doing more of that. Okay. And you saw what came out. We've only just completed, we're completing our first quarter. And we budgeted $2.5 million in interest income. We're already at 3.8 million. We're on track to get over $15 million because these rates aren't going down anytime soon. Okay, it's my business. They're not going anywhere. So by the end of the year, we may be pushing over $15 million. almost $13 million more than we budgeted. And how foolish was it to have all that angst and discussion and negativity when we could have easily done what we needed to last year. So we need to start there. But overall, I don't understand. Set up the fund, call it a operations and capital support fund, whatever you want to call it, and then just use the money as we seem, most at the time most needed. Trying to predict how much money the schools or any department's going to need 6 years from now doesn't make sense. And we shouldn't be trying to do it for other administrations. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm curious as to how my colleagues feel. And I may want to make a few points or ask a few questions later on, but for now, let somebody else have the floor.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Madam Chair, before we move on to the next speaker, I was hoping I could have a chance to go back to Councilor Gentile's first question
Sure.
regarding when a stabilization fund can be terminated. So the 3 years that are being referenced actually has nothing to do with the termination of a stabilization fund. And I apologize if I'm getting a little bit technical, but I have to explain the point to explain where that 3 years comes in so everyone understands. So under the Chapter 40, Section 5B that allows the creation of the stabilization funds, there are several different ways that the fund can be funded. Monies can go into it. One of the ways is that monies from a particular revenue stream can be dedicated to the fund. However, in order for the city to do that, we have to accept the general law, Chapter 40, Section 5B, so that we can dedicate those funds to the stabilization fund. Such acceptance of the general law cannot be revoked for 3 years. And that's a different statute that applies. There's nothing that prohibits the city from terminating a stabilization fund that was created, especially one here that's not being created by any dedicated funds from a revenue source. It's going to be funded through a single appropriation. I'm happy to answer more questions on that, but that in a nutshell is where the 3 years comes in, and I hope it answers the question.
Thank you very much. That is very helpful. I appreciate you raising it so we could clear it up quickly. I'm gonna go to the other member of the committee who has his hand raised, and then I'm gonna come to other members of the council. So Councilor Kalis, you are next. Then after that, I have Councilor Laredo, then President Albright.
Thank you, Chair Grossman. I think that my colleagues have made some good points, but I'm actually confused by some of them, and I'm looking for clarification. It sounds, and I'm hoping that we can hone in on actually what they're looking for. It sounds like from Councilor Humphrey, he's looking for a guarantee of where the money goes in the future. It sounds like what Councilor Gentile is asking is to not associate the dollars to specifically the schools because we can't predict exactly what the schools are going to need. And it seems, and if those are the key issues that they're really honing in on, it seems like those are very solvable. It just seems to me that we're nitpicking at something where the administration, I believe, has listened to us, has come back to us with a plan with more dollars than they expected and that we expected. Now, I fully agree with Councilor Gentile, and his memo I thought was terrific about interest income. I mean, to plan for $2.5 million when it's probably going to be closer to upwards of 10 million is really sandbagging it, and really affected, I think, the budget. And transparency is definitely required, but things have also changed. We know that free cash came in way higher, so that changed the equation. We also know that this type of thinking about an operational booster fund is also changing the equation. And I think we have to get back to what is the administration trying to do here? And Maureen talked about it earlier. Maureen, what is the objective of this fund? I'm asking you.
Thank you. It is to relieve pressure on the general fund so that we can direct more dollars to NPS and make sure that we are able to fully fund our pensions on the schedule that has been voted by the board, the retirement board.
And did you have to do that?
And this whole plan still has a $20 million gap in
And-
2030 or 31. So I mean, I always forecast a gap. I think the gap is solvable, but it certainly still has a gap.
Okay. And did you have to put this forward?
Did we have to?
Yeah.
The
Why are you putting it
stabilization?
forward?
Because we honestly believe that it is in the best interest of the city. As we're now on a 6.6% increase in the pension funding schedule. That is still going to, it's a huge improvement from 9.6, but if we want to stay fully funded by 2032, the number needs to be 6.6, and that is still going to create a strain on the budget. Would it be easier for us to take this whole 26 million and spend 15 on roads and put 10 into different infrastructure improvements throughout the city? Of course it would be. But over the next 8 years, the challenge is going to be able to continue to increase our operating budgets while we're making sure that we're increasing our pensions.
Okay.
That's why we did it. It would have been easier not to bring this forward.
Right. And that's my point, because I feel like we are getting bogged down in these details when the big picture, this is a good thing. They are found a way to have captured money become useful money and go into our operating fund, whether it is schools or the 30% elsewhere. Now, we can discuss and negotiate over, is it 70% that goes to the schools? Is there an exit plan so it doesn't all have to go to the schools if it's not needed, and it will be needed. But to be talking about rejecting something like this, that means we're giving up all that whole stream for 8 years. We have to think about the money that's being created here and focus in on the key questions you might have. If it is that guarantee that Councillor Humphrey wants, I don't know that the administration can guarantee that they're going to be able to generate the dollars they're saying here. A projection is just that. It's a projection. But they can guarantee that whatever is generated, 70% will go to the schools and 30% will go elsewhere. That, I think, is doable. And then to Councillor Gentile about trying to, you talked about the fact that they're predicting the exact amount that the schools are going to need. I don't think they're doing that. I think they're saying every year that we've been counselors, the schools have needed more money. So there's going to be more money that is generated here. And if the schools don't need the money, it's a 2/3 vote, and that the money can go elsewhere. So I don't think that this is, I think we have to really focus in on what are the real issues here, and if it's, and versus the big picture here, which I think is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Laredo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, thank you all for your efforts, and I very much appreciate you bringing this back in the committee so that we can have this thorough discussion. I'm going to have a few questions for you, Ms. Lemieux, and I'm going to try to, if they seem simplistic, forgive me, but I use the questions as a way of trying to understand what's being proposed to make sure I get the facts before I offer my opinions. So we have somewhere in the range of what, $28 million just in this fund that you're proposing to set up, right?
This is 26. The almost 28 is free cash.
Forgive me, and we have another 28 in free cash that's going to be used for an array of purposes, each and every one of them of which is going to come before us for our allocation, whether it's work on Horace Mann School or work on some other street projects or whatever. We're going to vote on that separately.
Correct.
So, as I understand it, and I think this is a good idea, given the large amount of free cash that we have, and by free cash, I mean the free cash plus this extra $26 million, it does make sense to me to put in some kind of a stabilization fund. So instead of using it for one-time purposes only, we get to use it over a longer period of time to essentially assist the operating budget over a longer period of time. And that's the global intent, right?
Correct.
Okay. So here's where I'm having difficulty. All of your assumptions, every single one of them, is based on this statement that we are going to contribute 3.5% every year to the schools. There is zero, folks, zero requirement that this administration or any other administration does that. It could go down to 2%. It could go up 5%. So when we say we're going to give a certain amount of money, added money to the schools, it will be exceptionally easy for the administration, not this necessarily, but any administration, to say, well, we're not going to allocate 3.5% to the schools this year. We're going to allocate 3%. And then the only additional money will be whatever, 0.25% comes from the stabilization fund that goes towards the schools. So frankly, I think we're kidding ourselves here, okay? There is zero guarantee that the school budget or the city budget are going to go up by any percentage. And it will be very easy for the administration, and I'm not suggesting this administration would do that, but any future administration, to play with this any way it wants to get whatever result it wants. The difference will be that this city council will be hamstrung, and by this council, I mean councils over the next 8 years, will be hamstrung in their ability to do anything about it without a 2/3 vote. And I think, as Councilor Gentile says, that gives up a lot of power. So my suggestion here is I'm supportive of the stabilization fund, but I don't think it ought to come with the strings that the administration is trying to attach to it. I think you can have it there. The intent is to use it over time. The intent is to use it judiciously. But the idea that you're going to, that we're putting out there as a statement that we are growing the school budget by 0.25% each year, frankly, it's not an accurate statement. It's not an accurate statement, because you can easily undercut that entire argument by simply lowering your percentage for the schools. And conversely, you could increase your percentage to the schools by doing the same thing. So I'm troubled by the restrictions that are trying to be placed on it. I think it unduly hamstrings future administrations and, more importantly, future city councils. And in that regard, at least until I hear from my colleagues, I think that is a mistake. And I don't think, Ms. Lemieux, that you need that restrictive language in order to set up the stabilization fund. Am I correct?
I think you are technically correct.
That's all I want to know. If I'm technically correct, I'm technically correct. You may not agree with the suggestion, but it's doable. Okay.
Yes, I think you're technically correct.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm all set.
Councilor Loretta, can I just ask you a question? I just wanted to ask you, because we heard a suggestion from Councilor Gentile about how he would, set up the fund. Is there specific language or a specific change that you would suggest that would meet what you're talking about? I just want to make sure, or what I'm trying to understand is what you're suggesting the same as what Counselor Gentile is suggesting, or are you suggesting something?
I think it's generally that, which should be used to supplement the general funds, and let each year the city council and the mayor work to use whatever portion of that fund it wants to use for whatever purposes it deems appropriate in that particular year. I mean, if we have a 10%, if we do a lot of housing development in the city, and 4 years from now, we have an influx of students and we need to suddenly build add modular classrooms, or add lots of teachers, we might need to increase the city's school budget much more than 0.25%. Conversely, if we see a continued drop in school enrollments, we might go the other way. I just don't think we have the ability to predict, 6, 7, 8 years in the future with any degree of certainty on that, at that specific type of level.
I'll just quickly tell you and colleagues that the issue that I have with going that direction is that, to me, what this proposal does is allow Dr. Nolan and her team to hire people, to hire back some of the positions that were cut from our budget this past year. And I don't know how, with language like that, how they could do that, like how they could, and like, to me, what the administration is trying to do is say, here's a projected set of cash flows that you can plan by so that you can go out and do that, hire human beings. But if they don't know what they're getting, how can they do that?
But Madam Chair, they never know what they're going to get. I mean, the fact that the mayor says my plan is to increase 3.5% a year, that's her plan. Next year, she might have a different plan. Every mayor could have a different plan. So I actually think it creates a false sense of financing to say I'm going to give a certain amount of this extra money towards the schools, because it's incredibly easy to take that same amount of money away by just allocating differently. I just don't think that is true. And my understanding, Ms. Lemieux, as well, it's none of this is for this calendar year. Am I correct?
You are correct.
So it's not going to do anything for this school year. We're talking a year from now at the earliest. The mayor is free next year to say, I'm going to raise the school budget to 4% if she thinks that's appropriate. So that's my response, Madam Chair. And it's a point we can differ on, obviously, and clearly.
No, I totally understand where you and others are coming from. I just see this one differently. Of course, the mayor has the ability to change from year to year how they're going to allocate funds and could swing things wildly. To me, this is a pretty good faith attempt to give a close approximation to what the future cash flows could look like. That's all. So I'm going to stop. I didn't mean to step over others and how they want to talk about things. I just think this seems to be sort of a fundamental point that's going to sway how people feel, and I feel a little differently about it.
Thank you.
Sure. I had told President Albright that she would go next. I know we have 2 members of the committee who have their hands raised. I'm just going to try to honor that order that I said. So President Albright, let me go to you, and then Councilor Oliver, then Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So very interesting conversation, comments, and questions from the members of your committee, Madam Chair. I don't see any windfall of funds coming to our city certainly in the near term. All of the projects that have been approved are stalled. So the new growth is not going anywhere, certainly not increasing in any fast rate of pace. So I think this is my own personal opinion is that this is a clever way to turn one-time money into ongoing money to support the schools. So that being said, I'd like to ask a few questions based on what I've heard from Councilor Gentile and Councilor Laredo. And perhaps this is to Andrew Lee and to Ms. Lemieux. Is there another mechanism besides the stabilization fund that can put this $26 million into it, whatever it is, and allow us to pull money out of it annually? Is there any other fund that mechanism that allows that to happen?
If I could jump in first, the reason that we've proposed it as a stabilization fund is because only trust funds or stabilization funds are able to keep any interest earned within the fund. And so what we wanted to be able to do was take the interest that this $26 million would earn, have that grow within the fund so that we would ultimately have more money to use for this plan. If we could let it drop to free cash if we wanted to. We could propose a higher amount of money. Each year, our financial management guidelines say that we can use up to $1.5 million of free cash toward the next year's budget. We could always come to you and change the financial management guidelines, use a higher number than that. But what would happen is any interest that's earned on everything, and this is actually explained in quite a bit of detail in what we sent you today that was part of our NTA response. Any interest that we earn on all of our other funds, so free cash, the overlay account, all those other accounts, that money goes to the general fund, that interest earned, and drops to free cash every year. So the short answer is the reason we're proposing a stabilization fund is because it would keep its interest and would help with this entire plan.
So it helps.
Madam Chair, point of order here, just a quick one.
Okay, that's fine.
The question was asked if we could do it another way. Unless I'm mistaken, we could set up a general reserve fund. And once a year, maybe at budget time, calculate how much interest $26 million earned and put it into the fund so it continues to benefit that way. And that's all that I'm suggesting, my good friend from Ward 8.
You mean me from Ward 2?
8. Mr.
Oh,
Kalis was
Councilor
wondering why I was suggesting this and that. I'm just saying, put it in a reserve fund. Don't tie yourself into knots. It's not necessary.
So if you put it in a reserve fund, and then each year calculate the interest and put the interest back into the fund or keep the interest in the fund.
Or put it in the general fund.
What kind of rules can be set? Like you've established some rules about increasing the 70-30 to the schools and the city, and amount, an increase of the allocation to the schools. Can you set those kinds of rules on this kind of fund that Councilor Gentile is describing?
If I can jump in, I think we can almost set whatever we want for rules or not have any rules. To go back to what Councilor Laredo was saying, we could tie our hands with the board order, or we could not. So I think these are all valid items. They're not our plan, but I think they are all valid questions and things that could be done.
Okay. I do want to comment on something that Councilor Gentile raised, is that with the last couple of years of the amount of free cash that we've been generating, it does, and I totally get why you would want to budget conservatively, spend conservatively, budget conservatively, but it seems like we might have reached the point where we're a little too conservative in our budgeting. And that perhaps a little bit more could go into the operating budget than we've planned. And, all these battles that we've had for the schools over the last couple of years really might have been able to be overcome if we weren't quite so conservative in our budgeting. So that would be my suggestion. And I know it might go against the grain, but it feels like we could be a little bit less conservative as we move forward.
So Madam Chair, can I just respond to that first?
Sure.
Because actually that was why I raised my hand a little while ago, I wanted to respond when Councilor Gentile was talking about the interest. And so I'm going to start my comments by saying, Councilor Gentile, thank you very, very much for the kind words. And Councilor Gentile and I have already had several conversations about this fund, and you know, we certainly can agree to disagree. But I want to be very clear about the interest income and why I have forecasted it the way that I have, and actually how far out on a limb I have gone. For those of you who know how conservative I am, if you look at the last 15 years, we have only had 1 year in the last 15 years where we have earned more than $2.5 million in interest. Okay, that's kind of a scary number. 84% of our revenue is from property taxes. That 84% is only going to increase by 2.5% each year, and then plus whatever new growth is. We know that our new growth numbers are in a range that is anywhere from 1.2 to 1.5 or 6% of our levy limit. We know those numbers. So that's not, there isn't a huge windfall there. The state, our Chapter 70 and unrestricted funds make up another 7% of our budget. Those funds, we only forecast about a 2.5% increase from the state for those. Our motor vehicle excise taxes really don't vary much. They did through the pandemic, but they don't vary much. If we were to budget, now $2.5 million obviously has turned out to be a number that, but back when we were budgeting in March and April, the Fed kept saying they were going to start to lower rates. Now, clearly that's not happening, and we are going to have a huge amount of interest income that will drop to next year's free cash. I completely agree with all of you that we will have that happen. If you look at the forecast on page, let me just find my forecast. On page 52, on my income page, I have actually, so for fiscal 25, which doesn't start for almost another year and lasts and really is 2 years away by the time we get to fiscal 25, I've actually increased the interest income number to $4.5 million. I've then lowered it in fiscal 26 to 3.5, then to 3, and then I've let it run out at $2.5 million a year all the way through, so for the next 10 years. Again, if you look at the last 15 years, we've only ever had 1 year that exceeded $2.5 million. We don't have the capacity to be absorbing. If we all of a sudden put a budget together for next year, let's say we get close to next year and interest rates are still going to be about 4%, and we think we're going to generate $8 million, okay? That's great for that 1 year. Our interest income needs to be treated more or less as one-time money because it can disappear just as quickly as it escalated this past year. If we don't make these numbers, what do we do the following year? Or if rates get back to 2.5, which is where the Fed is forecasting that they will be within a couple of years, what do we do? If we've relied on interest income for our budget, are we supposed to look at either the schools and say, sorry, you can't, not only can you not have 3.5%, you're only getting 3% next year. If they've baked money into their budget, or if we have on the city side, it's really, really difficult to ever lose a good revenue stream. So I know it may be frustrating to people, but I will tell you, when I put this forecast together, this is so far out on a limb for me, saying that we will budget and use $4.5 million next year. So it's a struggle. It's, so I understand what you're all saying, but we can't use it for permanent items that we bake into our budgets. It's if we were next year, if we were ever to think that we were going to get $8 million in interest, I have actually had this conversation with the mayor. I would suggest that we add an extra 3 or 4 million on our paving line. We would need to add it to one-time things so that we could choose in the following year or whenever interest rates drop, we could then take those one-time things out of the budget. So I'm not at all opposed to having this type of a conversation as we move forward and we're putting the budget together for next year. But what we can't do is use interest income as and bake it into our operating budgets. So I just wanted to be really clear on that. I understand what you're all saying, and it looks like we don't know what we're doing, forecasting it really low, but it's that we cannot rely on it. So that's just my pitch for why interest income looks like it does.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me that latitude.
Of course.
With respect to Councillor Humphrey's concern about the retirement board changing its rates, having dealt with the retirement board for a year with that small committee that was trying to help the administration lower the increase from 9.6 to something lower than that. The retirement board is not in a hurry to change their rates, and getting the rate change from 9.6 to 5 to from 9.6 to 6.6 was a struggle of its own. And I think, frankly, the fact that the council was arguing for a lower rate might have helped the administration get the 6.6%. They want to get this pension funded by 2032, I think is the year they've picked. And they do not want to budge off that. They don't want to budge off that dime. So I don't see, unless we have a whole new retirement board with different people with different philosophies, I don't see that changing. May I just ask Ms. Lemieux one more question? So I'm just trying to understand why you feel it's important to have the stabilization fund, which builds the rules in and sort of sets the rules for the next 8 years, as opposed to maybe a more loosey-goosey reserve fund, which doesn't have any rules attached to it.
So when we were putting this forecast together, we were struggling with, do we put a forecast together with only a 3.5% increase for the school department, or do we try to put a forecast together that has something a little bit higher? If we put it together with, say, a 3.7% increase, then our $20 million gap in fiscal 31 would have become a almost $26 million gap. I mean, it's a zero-sum game. We figure out the revenues first that we're forecasting, and then understand what the expenses are. So if we wanted to put together a forecast that gave the schools more than 3.5%. That was very much at the heart of what we were trying to put together.
So, and this firmly puts that rule in place that you will give money to the schools to increase it by 3.7% annually.
Yes.
Okay. And I suppose if there's a new mayor at some point in the future, they come back to the council and then we have this discussion all over again.
It certainly could happen.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, as I said, as I started my conversation just now, I don't see any windfalls coming that's going to give more money to the schools. And this is a clever way, this reserve fund is a clever way to take one-time money and turn it into ongoing funds. And the schools need this money. And I certainly hope that we will pass this tonight.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Oliver, then Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, there was just a lot to unpack there in that last 2 minutes. Did I hear, Ms. Lemieux, you were saying that putting these funds in a stabilization fund, specifically like that vehicle, that mechanism, somehow guaranteed X amount, like a fixed amount of dollars going to NPS? Did I kind of conflate two sentences there?
I'm sorry, Councillor Oliver. I think you may have conflated two thoughts. The way that the council order is written, talks about the 70% going to the Newton Public Schools, not the fact that it's a stabilization fund.
Great. So then just a couple of, I'm going to backtrack for just a couple of comments, and then I'm going to come forward with a couple of questions. First, Councilor Kalis, couldn't agree with just about everything that you said, with one exception. I don't think that there are many people here in this committee who are trying to shift where the dollars end up. In other words, with NPS. I think what we're trying to do, at least my read of this room, is we're actually trying to ensure that they do get there quicker or more easily or more, I'm going to use the technical term, more directly. Because what continues to confuse me, and I've heard the question asked a few different ways, is why do we collectively, why does the administration perhaps believe that the mechanism of putting the funds to offset the 1.6% and then take 70% of the savings from the 1.6 that's offset and give that to the school? Like, I get the math, I don't get the rationale, because it does seem overly, well, unnecessarily kind of convoluted. Not in any nefarious or, shell game way, because I truly believe that the administration is trying to do the right thing. I just don't understand why that is worded the way it is. Why not simply bring on an annual basis X amount of dollars, and it varies over the course of the next fiscal, the next 8 years, bring that money into the general fund, give X percent of it to the to NPS, and then X to the pension fund. So I'm wrestling with that because I've heard the answers, but they still they just don't jive with me. Again, another technical term. But one question that I wanted to kind of see, or one thing I wanted to see, which is why I was in favor of bringing this back into committee tonight, was I wanted to see what was going to happen on the CIP. And I find it really interesting that we now have a very long list of projects. And again, kudos to Commissioner Morse for all the work that went into it. I was kind of surprised to see that out of those 111 projects, only 6 of them, at least near as I can tell, have any impact in the next 5 fiscal years' budgets. Now, maybe that's because we didn't have a chance to really get to that level of detail. I was also kind of hoping to hear that there was some plan, and I think we've heard that there's going to be a plan for some percentage or some amount of the $28 million or nearly $28 million in free cash that was just certified, how that was going to be allocated to NPS. But we haven't heard that yet. And I do think that those 2 items, in my head anyway, meaning the item that we're discussing now and how we might allocate some of that free cash to the school projects that are listed here, would have been tied together a little bit. But maybe that was just too much work to get done in 10 days, and I could understand that. But I am curious, like, and Ms. Lemieux or anyone else here, I know there's quite a few folks here tonight, is like, how come we haven't gotten to that point yet? If we know, or if we're comfortable saying we don't need to use part of that $26 million for a project right now, how can we not know how we might use part of the $28 million for a couple of projects right now? Does that make sense? Did I word that okay?
So,
and I don't know who's here, who could answer that. I don't know.
If I may, Madam Chair, I just want to answer a couple of parts of that, at least, Councilor Oliver. I don't want anyone to think that we didn't finish the work in regards to those 111 projects. Those were all added so that the CIP would have a full list of long-term for all of our buildings. So Commissioner Morse put that together. Commissioner Morse, I was not at most of the CIP meetings this year. However, I can tell you that Commissioner McGonigal, Commissioner Banks, Commissioner Morse, and our Chief Operating Officer put a lot of time into looking at those 111 projects, and they need to be on the CIP list, but they are not the projects that would be, the first funded projects. And so that's why I say that we would want to sit and work with the school department. There might be some things that are not even on the CIP that they might think are more important, but the work was done. So even if we were to somehow decide that we were going to spend more money on capital, it wouldn't necessarily be that those 111 projects, I'm not quite sure where the next ones fall in the listing, but depending on where they are in priority, whatever the next things are that are not funded, those are the things that would be funded. But they were absolutely prioritized.
Oh yeah, sorry, I don't mean to say that they weren't priority because it's all right here. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Some of them, I would argue, seem to fall within the kind of the range, right, in terms of their scoring, that there should be some allocation within the next 5 years. But again, I don't want to. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I don't think that's really going to help us here tonight. But I will say that the more I hear about this and the more I understand everything except the one point that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, why connect this to the 1.6% offset in the general fund and then allocate some dollars across. Like, the more I'm hearing, the more I believe that Councilor Gentile's plan makes more sense. But anyway, I'll just leave it at that for now. I'm very curious to see what the next couple of minutes brings around in terms of conversation, but thank you. I appreciate that.
All set, Councilor Oliver?
I am for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Norton, then Humphrey.
Thank you. Although now the pressure's on because Councilor Oliver said he's looking forward to what's coming next. So I supported this proposal when we first heard it in finance. My opinion remains the same. In terms of the concern that the decisions that we make tie the hands in some way of future councils and mayors, many, possibly most decisions that we make tie the hands of future councilors and mayors. Decisions made decades ago about closing schools are still reverberating today. As you know, I've been arguing that the decision we're making to rebuild the countryside school in a swamp is going to reverberate in ways that I don't think are good. So that's something that we already do. I think one of the issues that is causing some of this consternation is the communications that came out from the mayor early on, saying, sort of touting that this would tie the hands of future decision makers. I don't think she meant it. My guess is she didn't mean it in sort of the negative way that many of us sort of originally saw that. What I see is that we're setting this funding aside. It's going to be kicking off interest that can be used for a specific purpose. My guess is that the mayor's administration thought that the purposes she was laying out were ones that we would generally agree on. We have to meet the 6.6%. There's no world in which we don't have to meet that. It's going to be very, very hard, less hard than 9.6% would have been. But I know when I've been talking to residents, many people do not realize how much that is tying up our funds and keeping us from being able to have nice things. When I tell people, yeah, 1/10 of our budget going to pay down a liability, that's a lot of money that is not available for other things. People really don't realize how huge this burden is. So we know we have to do this. So it's kicking off a little money there so that it's taking the pressure off of our operating budget for 8 years. And then the rest set to the schools. Well, we know there's no possible world in which our schools in the next 8 years aren't going to need this money. They already need it now. Our schools, whether you have kids in the schools or not, you know that our students have really suffered over the last several years and continue to. So we have a lot of needs that are not being funded. So to me, this was a very sensible way of demonstrating our values in funding the pensions, funding the schools. And yes, could we do it some other way? But to me, this seems like a very reasonable way to do it. So I did support it. I continue to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Humphrey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I wanted to go back to a topic that's come up a few times now in this meeting and something that I had brought up in the last finance meeting, but I think there's a lot more counselors present for this, so I think we should discuss it again. Ms. Lemieux, could you say at the peak amount in dollar terms, and we can use your projections for this, what's the ballpark that we're expecting in terms of interest from this in a given year? Like that's not the principal, the how much interest this is going to generate. And I think you're on mute right now.
I would say in this year and next year will be the peak years of when we generate interest, because we have the full 26 million now, or would if it's set up, and our interest rates are probably also about as high as they'll ever be. So I'm looking for my sheet. This is also in your forecast for anyone who might want to follow along on page 8 in the forecast. We actually have shown specifically what our interest assumptions are. And so the peak year would be actually next year, and it's just a little over $1 million next year that we would earn in interest from the assumptions that we built into this.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to underscore this point, because I think that, I've heard various conflicting things from different counselors, and I think part of it is just that not all the counselors are on the same page with each other about, what their priorities are here. But, not to say that $1 million is anything to sneeze at, but with the amount of principal that we're talking about, we're not talking about huge amounts of returns here. We're really talking about a fairly small amount of money that would be essentially new money, as opposed to the principal, which is the one-time funds. So, and I think that's an important point, because when it comes to something like the pension fund or any of those other very large pools of funding, we are usually talking about saying, okay, we're putting in this amount in principal, but then we're trying to get to a point where it's generating its own sort of income from investments, so that we don't have to keep putting more money in. Here, we're really not talking about that. This isn't so much an investment vehicle as it is a mechanism of parceling out a set amount of money over 8 years. And our hope, from what you said, is that the returns on this will at least keep pace with inflation, not just the macroeconomic price inflation, but also just the inflation of various project costs and operational costs and salaries and things like that over an 8-year period. But as we discussed at the previous meeting on this, it's certainly possible that it's pretty much just going to break even in terms of those inflationary costs in real terms, and it might even be less. And I think that's one of the other concerns that some of us have had in terms of, do we spend this money now or in a relatively short amount of time versus spending it over 8 years, is that the same amount of money, even with a little bit of interest, is going to not buy as much, in year 8 as it would now, and that we are at best keeping pace with this dollar amount, and at worst actually kind of losing money in real terms, depending on how the markets do, depending on how inflation does, et cetera. And so I just want to kind of underscore that point for some of the colleagues, especially who aren't on the finance committee. This is not pulling new money out of nowhere. This is really just pretty much dividing up money over an 8-year period. And it's not a revenue generator. And this is actually one of the points where I kind of diverge from my esteemed colleague from Ward 4 on this point. I know that his focus has been more in the direction of not touching the principal, just using the returns each year. My argument is this isn't really a significant enough amount of principal to be doing that. This is really just about kind of parceling it out over 8 years, in which case we should be spending it down to zero over that period. I in general, also, as I've expressed many times, and I did on the floor this spring as well, when we rejected the additional appropriation from free cash to the rainy day stabilization fund, I tend to be very skeptical of putting money into those type of investment accounts, because I feel like that the taxpayer dollars that we have are intended to be spent, not intended to be held in investment accounts for the purposes of generating additional revenue. I understand the arguments, on the other side. That's just my political preference on that. But I felt like this needed to be kind of restated here as to the dollar amounts we're talking about and what this vehicle is and is not, because this isn't really coming up with, nor do I think it should be coming up with additional revenues because of the amount of money involved and the expected returns. And then consequently, I would say that I tend to favor using it in a much shorter period of time, probably toward capital projects or something along those lines. And I just wanted to kind of get that out there, because I know that Councillor Kalis was expressing that he was trying to ascertain kind of where councillors were at in their opposition and critiques. I think some councillors have noted, especially after the recent full council meeting, that it's kind of that there's one group of councillors who are in favor of the plan and two groups of councillors who are against the plan as it stands currently, not a united group of councillors who are all against the plan for the same reasons. And therefore, we have some different objectives. I know that Council President Albright earlier tonight expressed that she hoped this would get voted out tonight and sent back to the council for a full vote. I would just suggest, again, from what we can hear tonight, from what we saw and heard at the full council before, at the moment, as things stand, it does not seem like there is a 2/3 majority in favor of this plan. I'm not even sure there's a simple majority in favor of this plan right now. And so if we actually want something to pass, I think there needs to be some more negotiation work happening here. I tend to lean in the direction of more on the capital improvements and maintenance type things, as well as I know that some, councillors like Councillor Noel, who couldn't be here tonight, had a lot of concerns about the recent changes to Numo, for example. I understand that's more of an operations thing, but kind of doing some bridge loans to continue developing Numo and that sort of thing. And I think there's a lot of potential options to look at here. And I don't want us to be hasty in rushing to pick one particular option. And I think, as I expressed before at the full council, that rushing to try to get this to a vote is going to end with a negative vote from the full council. And I don't think that that's what we want. And I would just caution that I don't think this is going to get, as it stands now, a 2/3 majority in favor if it goes. So I don't necessarily know that people who want this plan want this to leave committee tonight either, if they're being honest about it. But, that's for them to decide. Thank you.
Well, I'll just react to that point quickly. It was late when we had the discussion before a full council, and it's getting late again. I don't know if I'll put my words exactly as I mean them, but from my perspective, I agree with you that some people like the plan and other people don't, and for different reasons. I think where I disagree with you is procedurally what can be accomplished by continuing to hold it here and trying to negotiate it out. Because I also agree that people have different motivations and things they want to see. I personally think that the system that we have requires us to, we work through some things in committee. I don't see the administration looking to bargain or come up with something else. So my own personal opinion is that we should vote and the council should vote. And if it's a no, it's a no. And then the administration can propose their next best plan. I think it should be a yes. I'm a yes. once again, Counselor Norton really clearly summed up how I feel about it. The schools need money. This is a really thoughtful way to convert one-time funds to ongoing funds in a way that gives the school department something to count on to be able to put the money towards the needs that we know we have, both in terms of the effects of the pandemic and what we're catching up on and the positions that we know they need to fund. And I think it's pretty simple, and maybe I'm just I'm a little less skeptical, I guess, of some of the pitfalls and biases that others are pointing out. And I'm not saying that they're unfair. I totally get where everybody's coming from. I think everybody's comments have been reasonable. I just don't share them. But personally, I think that keeping it around in committee and trying to come up for endless amounts of hours with other plans is gonna not yield a lot. So that's just not my preferred preference procedurally. Of course, as you all know, I will follow the will of the committee. So if you all decide you want to hold it and talk about it for more meetings, then that's what we'll do. Ms. Lemieux, you had your hand up. Did you have a quick reaction to something? Because I just want to continue getting the other counselors, but I don't want to skip over you if you have something you feel you need to add.
Thank you. I actually wanted to, I hope, help with answering Counselor Oliver's issue with why do I still keep talking about, why is this still tied to the 1.6% for pension? So whenever you would like me to try to go through that one more time, I think I have a more succinct way of explaining it as I've thought about it, but I'll do it whenever you would like me to.
Hold it for a minute. Let me just hear the reactions of the other three members of the committee whose hands are up, and remind me if I forget to come back to you, okay? Counselor Gentile.
Thank you. So on the amount of money that the fund's going to generate, unless I'm missing something, the first year when we have $26 million, the last time I checked with the treasurer, which wasn't very long ago, our money is primarily in the state MMDT fund, and it was pushing 5.3%. That's over $1.3 million that we're going to be generating, at least off the bat. I don't see how that's $1 million. So it's simple math. Secondly, I'm glad that Council Humphrey mentioned what he did. He didn't 100% accurately describe what I have been thinking or what I would have preferred to see. I would not have said that limited to just the interest that was generated by the fund, but I wouldn't have started off immediately with the premise that we were going to spend all of this money in 8 years. First of all, I guess maybe the 8 years is tied to the remaining years of the pension. Maybe that's it. But
it.
I don't think that we had to, right from the get-go say we're going to spend all of it. Maybe we could have said we were going to spend all the interest and up to $1.5 million of principal every year, and then at the end of the 8 years, we would actually still have some money that we could use for any number of things. I guess we always, our first thought is always spend. And that might be part of the problem here. The other thing, we have Mr. Hurley on, and he could help us, I bet. But we've been in a situation in the schools of declining enrollment. And I'm not sure what happened this year, but we have dropped substantially over, I believe, the last 3 or 4 years. And what if that continues to happen? And, and then in year 6, I mean, we're down to, some pretty low numbers. So we're just going to automatically give the money that we're talking about to the schools, even though this is the point that I'm trying to make, is that there were a lot of uncertainties there. And I understand what Councilor Norton was saying about, we make decisions that affect, the future, but not to this degree. I've never seen a plan like this you know, to dictate what's going to happen to, you know, our operating budget this far out. And it hasn't happened for a reason. There's an elephant in the room, and at some point we're going to have the discussion. It's not tonight, but I look forward to the schools department's budget when we get to the budget this year, because for the life of me, I don't understand how we have the declining enrollment numbers that we have, and then B, if you look at the fourth page from the back of the presentation that Maureen gave us, all of the one-time monies and recurring monies, the moves that the administration has made over the last several years to lessen the burden on the school department budget. And yet, in addition to the 3.5%, in addition to the declining enrollment, it just befuddles me that the schools never have enough. I need help in understanding that. And for the benefit of our new superintendent, who hopefully I'll meet soon, my first career was as a teacher and a coach for 6-7 years, and I actually worked in the Newton Public Schools. And one of the first things I did as the chairman of the school committee back in, I think it was 1983, is nobody ever does anything alone, but no one was more responsible for getting a 3-year contract done that gave the teachers union a 7% increase, a 7.5% increase, and a 7% increase. Because I had seen the damage in previous years of work to rule, especially in the previous contract. And I was, you know, I really wanted to see if we could avoid that. And with the help of my colleagues, we gave out the single largest contract to the teachers that has ever been given in the city of Newton, at least in modern times. And I stood by it then, and I'll stand by it today. I believe in education, and I especially believe in the classroom teacher. So I'm not the ogre that you probably think from seeing this meeting tonight. But anyway, so I'll just leave it at that. But I just don't know how you can tie everybody's hands up, you know, without knowing what's going to be, what the lay of the land is going to be, you know, 3, 4, 5 years from now. So flexibility. All I'm saying is set up a fund like you're talking about doing. Just don't tie everybody's hands as much as we're talking about doing it, and decide on an annual basis where the money should be spent.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Gentile.
My final point is, I understand where Councilor Humphrey's coming from, but the chair's right. This is what really eats at me. Every other mayor's administration, when things like this came up, if you were in a position where you would be briefed, as I often was as the finance chair, you were brought in, and it was relatively early in the process where you had an opportunity to express your opinion and maybe influence the final result or whatever ended up being proposed. That doesn't happen with this administration. You're brought in to be briefed, which, you know, that's a good thing, but the decision's already been made, and you can't influence the decision. And that's why I have been so utterly frustrated over the last 4 years in particular. And Ms. Lemieux is in the room, and she could have testified to it. I'm not going to put her on the spot, but she's been in the room when things were different. When people like me and other chairs or whatever were brought in and saying, this is what we're thinking of doing. What do you think? And sometimes you affected some changes, and sometimes the mayor would say, I like my plan. But at least you had the opportunity to be involved and possibly influence things. So you're right, Madam Chair. The mayor's not going to change. She's not going to come back and say, you know what, maybe I don't need it as a stabilization fund. Maybe I'll just set it up as a general reserve fund. That isn't going to happen. That's not what she does. I think it's wrong, but it's not what she does. So you might as well just vote tonight.
Dr. Nolan, I saw you had raised your hand and wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to answer some of those questions or points.
I don't want to take anybody on the council's time to speak tonight, but I can tell you, Counselor Gentile, you'll be quite pleased with some of the ideas we have for budgeting and transparency that might make things easier to look at, in addition to tracking on the enrollment and also reviewing our current practices for internal efficiencies. I just need some running room right now in order to get there. We're only 3 months on the job. So that's why I'm here to look for any funding source that can enhance our work at this time.
Counselor Kalis, then Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in listening to everybody, I do want to give the administration one more chance, Counselor Gentile. I know what the result is probably going to be, but Ms. Lemieux, what I'm hearing is there are 3 areas that I'd really like you to go back and discuss. I think one is on flexibility and the way that you've auto allocated dollars, where when you're looking out in out years, we can't really know where that money should go. So is there more flexibility that can be built in there? The second is fewer restrictions. And that means, is there a different mechanism by which this fund can be executed? And the third, what Councilor Laredo brought up, and what I'm calling is there some type of floor on the school committee percent budget increase each year, so this fund just doesn't become play money to actually get to the 3.5%? Are there any parameters that you can build in around there? I'd welcome my colleagues to add in anything else, but look, I am for this fund. I think it is a good way to add some dollars to our budgets in the out years, but I hear what Councilor Humphrey is saying, and I want it to pass. So I want to work on it before it gets to the full committee again. So I will move hold. But I'm hoping that the administration comes back, and if you come back and say, you know what, we're not moving on anything, then so be it. But I just want to give it a couple weeks. Thank you.
So we have a motion to hold. Ms. Lemieux, let me give you a second to quickly respond to that if you want. And then I'm going to go to Councilor Norton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really need to respond. I will certainly bring your request, Councilor Kalis. If the motion passes to hold, I will bring this to the mayor. If, on the other hand, you decide to move forward and take a vote one way or the other, then we'll go from there.
Okay, Councilor Norton.
I wanted to just reiterate, but then the superintendent spoke, so kind of made that point anyway, that this does have that statement that was read at the beginning of our meeting, unanimous support from our school committee. School committee isn't always unanimous on things, so that I do think says something. And I don't at all dispute what Councilor Gentile said about the way things have been done in the past, and that there have been times when I have also experienced that I would have liked to have been brought into various decisions. So I don't want to at all have the implication be that I don't agree with that part of his viewpoint related to my position on this particular proposal. And also, I do think that the questions he's raising about how we're spending school dollars, just like how we spend all of our dollars, we need to be making sure that we're doing that wisely. But I have all the faith. In 3 months, I'm already blown away by the approach that the superintendent has taken with communicating and meeting with parents and transparency. So I very much look forward to the future communications about school dollars. I was just going to say that I'm ready to move it, but I know that I've already been it was taken away by Councilor Kalis, who has made a motion to hold. So if that goes forward, then never mind. But if it doesn't, then I'm ready to move it.
Madam Chair,
Yep.
I'm going to be an optimist and not a pessimist, so I'm going to vote to hold.
Okay. Are there other comments on the motion to hold? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of hold, please say aye.
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 I'm opposed. Anybody else?
I'm opposed.
Okay, any abstentions? Okay, so I think that is 5 in favor of hold, 2 opposed, no abstentions, and that'll do it. Do any other last comments or questions before we adjourn the meeting? Okay, since we're holding this and Councillor Kalis enumerated 3 things that he would like Ms. Lemieux to take to the mayor for her response. If there are other points, obviously we discussed quite a bit here tonight. If there are other points that any of you would like a specific answer to, councilors, please write them down. Please write them down and submit them by email, ideally to me and Ms. Lemieux together. I'm not going to come up with a deadline off the top of my head, but I will say, as is common, all the questions came in today. All the emails came in today. That's really difficult for the administration to respond to. It's really difficult for me to know what's there. So to the extent you have something you want to ask, please, the sooner the better. President Albright, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that, thank you for holding this meeting on a Thursday that wasn't opposite ZAP. So the next meeting, I'm sure, will be opposite ZAP. And it would be impossible, given the time frame that committee is on, to for us to not be in the meetings. And I don't know what I don't think there's any mechanism to have our thoughts. Maybe we can make our thoughts known. Write an email to the committee about our thoughts on it. We can't participate in the conversation, but. Just wanted to say that, ZAP won't be able to, ZAP members are here, many of them are here tonight, and we won't be able to be here for the next meeting.
Right. I'm just thinking about the open meeting law mechanism around that. I don't know if, I'm just not sure about how that works. You can think through that a little bit more, perhaps. Councilor Laredo, did you want to say something?
I just want to comment on the open meeting law aspect of it. I think you're quite right to be concerned about it, but the way around that is the way I've described to the president or previously on multiple occasions, which is to write an email to the committee or the full council, make sure it's posted contemporaneously on the city's website, and don't let anyone respond to it, reply all. That is permissible, and you can communicate any way you want. You can do that in ZAP too, for that matter. Because
I think if the committee, if any member sends it to the clerk and asks them to post it, that would be a better way to do it. Then you don't get any reply all.
Oh, I think you're right, Madam President. That is a better way to do it. But the key is that it gets posted and then circulated contemporaneously. And if you do that, you comply with the open meeting law, and no one should respond, reply all, which is hard to enforce, of course. Anyways, thank you. Hope that helps.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry to just insert
Sure.
myself here, but you are talking about the open meeting law. We have had numerous conversations about this. President Albright, all I would request is that before sending any communications or suggesting to any of the other councilors send any communications to full city council, if we could speak on the exact procedure that should be followed.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so President Albright, I'm going to leave it to you to speak to Attorney Lee and to clarify on what folks should do to submit their comments before the next Finance Committee meeting, when we will take this up again. I want to particularly thank Superintendent Nolan and Assistant Superintendent Hurley for your participation tonight. I know it was a lengthy meeting with a lot of content. It really added a lot of meaning to our conversation to have your thoughts and participation and to bring forward the resolution from the school committee. So we really appreciate it. Know how much you guys have on your plate and wanted to just say thank you. with that, I think we are adjourned at 9:48, and we'll discuss this again in approximately 2 weeks. Got to look at the calendar and figure out exactly what it is. Okay. Good night, all.